Welcome to this edition of When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine, a discussion of sustainable living and what that means to you and me. I'm Jay Warmke.
And I'm Annie Warmke.
You surely are, and today we're going to talk about forest gardening, or is this the ultimate no-till farm?
Where do you come up with these
I don't know,
things?
but that one was not one of my better ones.
That does not make any sense at all.
Okay, anyway, it does make some sense. But we're joined today by Chad Cully. And Chad, are you there for us?
I'm here.
All right,
Okay.
great. Well, Chad, why don't you, tell us a little bit about yourself so that people have the expectation.
And what you're doing these days.
Yeah, that you are an expert.
So I currently work for the Cincinnati Zoo. I work in the horticulture department. I mostly help out with the nurseries at Boyer Farm, which is out in Mason, Ohio. So that formerly was the Eco-Ohio Wetlands. Some people still know it as that. And at home, I practice this forest farming, forest gardening stuff. So yeah, that's and I kind of keep a little nursery at my house as well.
So you're being modest when you say you have a little nursery and you're helping out, and I think you're being kind of modest. But I'll just throw that out there because you and I can spend hours talking about plants and trees, particularly trees and forest gardening. And that's the reason why I wanted to talk today, because I'm super excited about the idea of creating gardens in a forest. And it's just enchanting, I think.
Okay, for the ignorant among us like myself, what exactly...
You admitted it? Wow, that's great.
I don't only admit it, I live it each day. So what exactly is a forest garden?
So it's basically what I would say is it's a system of farming it's a very old system of farming, and probably kind of grew out of the hunting and gathering communities initially. And it's it's based on woodland ecosystems. So you're kind of observing plant communities, and you're trying to kind of replicate the way they all work together, and you're going to kind of do your farming kind of in layers, kind of starting with a canopy layer up in the tops of the trees. You're going to go down to the smaller trees, and then down to shrubs, and herbaceous layer, and then down to root plants, and then ground covers and vines. So you're not just farming in rows as conventional agriculture would with soy or corn. A little different take on farming, but conceivably one type of farming that might help to, keep the ground covered, keep the soil in place, keep the water a little cleaner, and hopefully keep the air a little cleaner too.
It sounds
also
a little
cooler. I think it would have influence on temperature, wouldn't it? Also.
Yeah.
I would think it sounds very three-dimensional to me.
Yes.
As an uneducated bystander.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully some another tool to sort of fight climate change.
So when you're talking about these different layers, let's get a couple of examples of what things might be grown. You mentioned the top layer, like the canopy layer. What are we looking at in that realm of your garden?
So on your property in particular, I feel like I remember a lot of hickories, a lot of beech trees. So those could be your kind of upper layer, some oaks maybe even, black walnut, for example. And then, you might get down into, say, you're like maybe some dogwoods, some smaller trees, and then elderberries a little lower than that, and maybe some some
Spicebush.
I don't know, blueberries, spicebush, pawpaws, June berries, raspberries, And then when you get onto the forest floor, you could be talking about things like ginseng or golden seal, even mushrooms, and and maybe some non-native things too we could talk about later. Or vines like Apios americana, which is a ground nut.
And these things, some of which you've described, are growing naturally already, so you're just gleaning what's already there. But I assume that it's something that you could plan for and manage and plant for as well.
Right, which is, historically what humans did for a very long time before we started monocropping. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I remember in an anthropology class they were saying these garden areas of a lot of the, tribal cultures were, you just wouldn't even know it. These were tended farms, but they looked for every bit to the outsider as just wild forest.
Sure, yeah, it's interesting you say that because I think, if you read books like Charles Mann's 1491 or some other sort of adventures into that topic, like M. Cat Anderson's Tending the Wild, you started to see that Europeans didn't really fully understand the systems that they were looking at, and so they viewed it to be kind of impractical or wasteful. But again, North American communities were farming all the way up into the tops of the trees. And then all the way down to the ground. What we have now in many cases, especially in our area, the leftover plant communities from their agriculture might be, like a community with black walnut and hickory and elderberry and aronia, and ginseng, or false unicorn. So that could kind of comprise a local community that we have an example of.
Well, one of the things that I felt when I first came back to Ohio to live here was a real frustration about the fact that even as a kid, I knew a lot about the plants and the bark and the buds and all that stuff. And then it just sort of left me. And so I still feel fairly ignorant, but then when other people come around and I start talking about it, I start thinking, oh man, I know a lot, but I don't. And I remember somebody saying once that the real power that they said a man has, but as people have, is to know the flora and fauna of where they live and what really belongs there and what they can do with it to sustain themselves. And I wondered how we could learn better about plants and how to identify them and how to know the difference between something that ought to be eradicated, like tree of heaven, which is not heavenly at all, or something like an oak tree or a black walnut versus another kind of walnut. So do you have some ideas about how that could happen?
Yeah, I think learning to ID plants and learning your local plant community is really a powerful way to get started into, some kind of forest farm on your own property, definitely. There's tons of great books out there that you could take along with you on a walk with your dog or with your kids. One of them in particular that I'm very fond of is Samuel Thayer's book, The Forager's Harvest. I'll take that one with me, or anything Lucy Braun has written. And just get out and walk and look. If you can find somebody that already knows a little bit about, the plants in your neighborhood, go along with them as much as you can. But mostly just get out there and walk and find people to ask some questions, take some pictures, and just, get as familiar as you possibly can, because you'll learn what you like out there. And you may learn to forage. You may find some berries or find some fruit or some roots out there that maybe you're interested in. So you can kind of revisit those places and maybe collect the seeds or the roots for propagation in the future.
Well, we were talking earlier, you and I, actually, about the difference between native and non-native, and I thought you had some interesting insights regarding, there are the purists out there who will say, oh, that's not a native species, and So explore that idea just a little bit about the difference between native plants, non-native, how that's all changing because of climate change, things of those nature.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that this is not so black and white. What we have now maybe in most cities and even out in rural areas is not what it used to be. It's not native, So as an example, I think there's a really great example of the salt cedars along the Colorado River. For years, the local governments and even the federal government have tried to get rid of the salt cedars along the Colorado River. And they're spraying all kinds of interesting chemicals like Garlon and Rodeo and Arsenal along the river.
Wait, what do you mean by interesting? It didn't sound like that means a good thing.
Well, they might cause cancer. They might not. I don't know. I mean, Rodeo is glyphosate. So,
So they're more than interesting, Chad.
Yeah, they're definitely
they're
more
deadly.
Than interesting.
Deadly plants. Let's be honest here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, who really likes to talk about native versus non-native? I think it might be chemical companies. That's another conversation altogether. I think these plants maybe are telling a story. That in the case of the salt cedar is telling the story that it's got in there because there's excess fertilizer and coal mine spills, and then the river just flows through an area where the rock is naturally saline. And so, all these things together are making the river more salty than normal. And then on top of that, it's not flooding like it used to. And that river's no longer making its delta in a lot of years. So because of that, along the banks where the trees grow, it's staying saltier. And so, the native cottonwoods and the native willows can't grow. And then that kind of down the chain means, certain birds aren't going to be around any longer. And so people want to fix that. But, I don't know that the solution would be to just go in with, excavation machinery and just dig things out and spray things along the banks of the river to get rid of these things. It might be that we have to address the bigger problems way up the chain that nobody really wants to talk about. So how do we do that?
Well, you've just defined our entire medical model, right?
It's all feeding. It's all feeding the economy in a way that's very detrimental. That's how we define that. So native plants versus non-natives. I mean, how do you even have this conversation without talking about agriculture? Because is all the corn and soy and all the things that we're growing in big, huge pieces of land that take up an astronomical percentage of the land, and especially the Midwest where we live. How do you have that conversation, native versus non-native, when you're in terms of fighting for the native plants, you're talking about just scraps of land that are left over from farming. And if farming wants it, then, they might get it. So I don't know. It's maybe we need to address those issues.
Okay, well, let me first address that you are indeed listening to When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine with Jay and Annie Warmke, reminding you it is indeed the end of the world as we know it.
And thank God.
Thank God. And we're joined today by Chad Cully, our resident horticultural expert, who is talking about forest gardening and other things that affect the life universe and everything else.
Well, I just want to say, when we say it's the end of the universe, and thank God, that one of the exciting things is that we're in a time period where we're saying, all right, these things that we've done in the past are in the past, and now we have to put something in its place, and forest gardening seems like a really great solution, even if we have to argue it down from the agriculture people.
Right. So am I hearing from you, Chad, when we're talking about native, I don't want to beat this to death, but the native versus non-native, it strikes me from your perspective that is a false narrative, that the native plants are an ever-changing thing, and kind of a distraction from the bigger issue of how do we take care of what we've got regardless.
Yeah, to a point, yes. I think that's mostly what I think. But also, you have to keep in mind that there are some native plants that are worth preserving. And I'm a huge fan of native plants. So I don't want to give the impression that I think we shouldn't preserve these plants and we shouldn't try to preserve these ecosystems or plant communities. But I just wonder at what cost are we trying to do that? And then also keeping in mind, how did these plant communities get to be the way that they are? And it's like I said, if we understand that these plant communities got to be the way they are because somebody was farming them several hundred years ago and keeping them maintained, they were, very heavily maintained communities of plants. The United States was not just a virgin wilderness before Columbus got here. So, I think it's important to just kind of mind these pieces of history and understand that, there might be more to the argument.
I love the whole concept of if we just study the land and see what she holds with her soil content, depending on what that is, and then what plants already exist and what really needs to be moved out of the way so it's not naturally killing everything else. If we do that, and then also if we go back and we can look at livestock and look at pigs, and if they're allowed to live naturally, what they do is they want to be in the forest and they root up all kinds of things, and suddenly what happens is the forest has plants it never had in terms of what you were looking at before those pigs went in there, because it's regenerating some of these seeds, and it's just an amazing concept. So there are a lot of ways to regenerate the land and create resiliency, and I think that's what we're really talking about. And it might mean that we bring in a plant that wasn't there that we know of naturally, but it has a place there now that can survive where the environment can't support other plants. And I think that's where that exchange comes in between native and non-native. And how can it withstand all it's bombarded from agriculture and all the things that people do to it? So anyway, now that I gave my sermon, I wondered if we could talk about how do we really get started creating a forest. So take a walk and learn how to identify some plants. But then the next thing we should do is what?
So let me see. I think you would, at that point, you would want to, after you've started to kind of address some of the history and learn a bit of that, learn to ID some plants, learn about plant communities. You're starting to take lots of walks. You might want to start collecting those seeds and start growing those seeds, and start kind of keeping a small little plant nursery. Learn what to do with the seeds to care for them so that they can get growing. And maybe learn where you can go and collect seeds, or even maybe fully or small plants, maybe fully grown plants, or smaller, almost fully grown plants, such as maybe some new development before they go and mow it all down. Maybe you can get in there and find some plants that you could save. That's might be a nice way to salvage some native plants before they get gunned down, so to speak.
There are also some groups in Ohio that have been doing what they call plant rescue, where they're doing some of that. So one of the things that I would suggest, too, is that because the forest might be a big space or it might be a small space, but if you were to create blocks of space and maybe start in one space so it seems more manageable than the whole area. Like we have about 35 acres of woodland, And that seems like overwhelming to me. But if I start thinking about one little block and then another little block and another little block, it suddenly seems like, wow, I can do that. So where can what do I want to put in that space and what already exists there? So, but I can't imagine that you're suggesting that we go and steal things.
Oh, I can imagine that.
Don't
I can
steal
imagine
things.
it.
We have stolen things.
Be careful,
You cautioned me, but yes, but the thing is that there are seeds everywhere. It's incredible. And also there are lots of Facebook pages and people online that collect up seeds, seed savers out of Iowa. They have lots of great seeds, and also Baker Seeds has collected seeds from all over the world, and they do sell them, but there's a lot of amazing seed out there to be collected up if you're able to ID trees and understand how it all works, because there's a science to it. So what kind of plants are easiest to grow and propagate?
Well, for me, I've had a lot of luck doing elderflower and currants. You can do those without having a mist system.
You mean like a way to water it?
Yeah, so you don't need a little, a mist system is basically going to be like a little table, maybe even with a cover over the top, and or inside of a greenhouse, and it's going to just every 20 minutes or every 5 minutes or whatever you set it to, it's going to mist spray your scions or your cuttings. So you've gone and you've taken little twigs from your plants, cut them off, and then put them in some kind of growing medium, and you keep them sprayed, give them some light and not too much nutrient, and eventually they'll turn into little baby trees or baby shrubs.
Couldn't you just cover them with a plastic bag and get a similar effect? Because it sounds like they have to stay fairly wet.
Yeah, so for me personally, with the elderflower or the currants, or even with Yosta berries, you can get those started without a mist system, and really easily, and you'll get almost 100% of them too. So, it's worth kind of keeping track of the ones that are easy to grow for sure.
So tell me about...
And I just wanted to say, too, Annie, I think there is actually a Seed Savers Exchange there in Athens.
Yes, there is, and they used to have a book. It's through Community Food Initiatives. And there's also a really great place that has native plants. I think that Jay worked with them.
Companion planting.
Oh, yeah, companion planting. So they exist. They're all over the place. They're just, they're not mainstream, so you have to seek them out. That's why it's great to go online and ask people where they know about these things are, where they are to exist. But let's say that I want to start some Spicebush, which is a great plant, and the seeds of it are highly sought after as a peppery substance with different ethnic groups, and also sell for quite a lot per pound. So you can make some money from it. And I wondered, so if I wanted to propagate that, what would I need to do to make that happen?
So I've had pretty good luck myself with Spicebush. Again, not in a mist system, just cuttings from that plant. I've gotten them pretty early in the spring. You want to get them before the buds start to open up. They got to still be dormant. Another option would be to buy bare root plants. You can get bare root plants pretty cheap, and you can get a lot of them. And you could also get plugs too. So you can check different nurseries, maybe like Twisted Tree Nursery or North Creek Nursery or something like that if you're looking for that kind of thing. And you get a lot of small plants for a lot of cheap. Spicebush grows fast, so you don't need to get fully mature plants. And again, you can just take cuttings if you really want to do it cheap. It's a little hard to find the berries though, because there's female and male plants, and so you have to kind of hit it at the right time to find the berries. But you can do it if you know where to look.
Or if you have a forest garden.
Right.
One thing I was thinking about in terms of plants is that almost every state has a state nursery, and they sell bulk packages. So you could buy 25 or 50 plants for pennies. And I know I bought a lot of plants when we first started Blue Rock Station through Missouri, through the natural resource place there, because they were a lot less expensive than Ohio. So I was supporting Missouri. But anyway.
Speaking of native plants,
yes,
right?
Well, they have. So that's a good point, Jay, because the soil that they came out of was not the right soil for us. And they did fine because they are native to this area, but it's better to buy plants. If the absolute best thing is to buy plants, bare rooted or whatever, from soil that's similar from your area, but it isn't always possible. Or if you don't have a bunch of money, or you're cheap, frugal like me, and I wanted to have a lot of plants, so I planted silky dogwoods and hazelnuts and things like that.
Well, Chad, now these things are being planted out in a more wild environment than, nicely tended rows like we think of gardens. What kind of critter protection do you have to deal with? You've got deer, you've got raccoons.
And humans who sometimes will steal
stalking the wild ginseng.
That's right, yes.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, you're not going to have as much protection. You might just not have any protection at all. And so, you kind of you're gambling a bit. But I think, with over time, that your odds are just increasing. So if you're doing it every year, you're propagating plants at home from seed or from cutting, or like I said, or if you're getting bare root plants from other places, you're just doing it every year. You're just really staying on top of it. Then I think you could easily cover, I don't know, a few acres in a few years, really. I mean, it's going to be a lot of work, and you're going to lose a lot, and there's going to be some disappointment, but well worth it once you get yourself maybe a nice little patch of some ramps or some ginseng. And you can do that just by maybe collecting the seed or buying the seed and starting to cast it out in certain areas, maybe kind of a little bit closer to your house, because a lot of critters like to eat those things.
Okay, well, we've got about 20 seconds left. Do you want to sum it up here? Sum up the entirety of forest gardening. Quick.
Well, I think it's a great way to create commonwealth and to tell stories with each other, and that's really the thing we want to do, is just get out there and have some fun, create some shared experiences, because those shared experiences with plants and with people kind of give us all a common history and keep us grounded.
Okay, well, thanks. You've been listening to When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine with Jay and Nanny Warmke. We want to thank our special guest, Chad Cully. Thank you, Chad. And our award-winning producer, Adam Rich, for spending a little bit of time with us. And we want to thank you for spending time with us as well. And we will remind you, as I ramble, that the secret to a happy and sustainable life is...
play nice with others, clean up your own mess, and plant some trees so you have shared stories.
All right. Till next time. Bye-bye.
Will sing, and her children will be healed. 'Cause I see the morning glory blossom in the night. Know the stars are dancing in the twilight. Soon we'll be together, all will be revealed. Mother Earth will sing, and her children will be healed.
You can find more information on living sustainably in our unsustainable world at bluerockstation.com.
Yeah!